The Benghazi Gate scandal. Obviously, the lies and obstructions appear to morph more and more with each passing day. In recent days, we've got yet another excuse which now is being shopped to the American people to explain the horrible tragedy, namely that Barack Obama was simply AWOL as the tragedy unfolded. We now know, assuming Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta's testimony is accurate, that the subject of the attack was discussed during a meeting that had been pre-scheduled at 5 p.m. that day, about an hour and a half after the attacks allegedly started. We now know, according to Panetta's testimony, that Obama left the operational details up to Panetta and General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we now know that when Senator Kelly Ayotte asked whether Obama had called to check on the status of the events in Benghazi, Panetta said no. And he furthermore said that he did not communicate with anyone, repeat, anyone, at the White House on the night of September the 11th. So where was Obama? We now know he gave a speech in the Rose Garden the following morning before jetting off to a campaign event in Las Vegas. But what was he doing in the interim? We were initially told that the battle was sent on streaming video direct to the Situation Room in the White House. And according to initial media reports, we were told that within 2 hours, emails from Benghazi reported that Al-Qaeda in Libya was already claiming responsible for the attack. The timelines released by the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon tell us that a surveillance drone was dispatched to the scene of the attack at approximately 4 p.m., that would be 10 p.m. Benghazi time, and that the drone was actually in place at 11:10 p.m., while Obama was meeting with Panetta and General Dempsey. But then, Hillary Clinton told us during her congressional testimony, and we'll quote, "There was no monitor. There was no real time. We got the surveillance videos some weeks later, and that was the first we saw of any attack." So who's lying? Who's telling the truth? Are we to believe that a surveillance drone was actually in place? The Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA say yes, and no one was bothering to watch the feed of the unfolding attack in the Situation Room? Or are we to believe that Barack Obama watched the events unfold that took the lives of brave Americans and simply fiddled as Rome, or in this case, a consulate in Benghazi, burned? Perhaps Hillary Clinton herself said it best during her testimony. What does it matter? But, much like the initial lie that the attack was a spontaneous demonstration in reaction to an obscure YouTube video that no one had ever seen before, this latest revelation is probably not keeping Barack Obama awake at night. Why? Because in the end, attributing this horrendous event to foreign policy ineptitude and incompetence is for Obama preferable to actually having to answer many of the real questions surrounding Benghazi-gate. Questions that are not being asked. Benghazi-gate is not about a bogus YouTube video or a series of lies. It's not even about Obama regime, foreign policy, and ineptitude. We're dealing with something potentially much more sinister, something potentially treasonous, something that the Obama administration seeks to hide from the American people, potentially something that, if known, could even lead to the impeachment of Barack Hussein Obama. Even a Democratic strategist, Jimmy Williams, who was a guest on CNBC's Kudlow Report, called Obama's Benghazi-gate lies, quote, a scandal worthy of impeachment. Now, there's not enough time tonight to cover every single nuance of the emerging scandal, but we can at least give voice to some of the questions that do need to be asked and questions that also need to be answered. Even the timelines eventually released by the CIA, the Pentagon, and the State Department actually beg more questions than they answer, and would lead a reasonable person to suspect that a cover-up of the highest magnitude is going on here. Here are just a few observations. Point. According to all three timelines, the attack on the Benghazi consulate started at 3:42 p.m., 9:42 p.m. local time in Benghazi. But back on November 3rd, Fox News reported, and I'm quoting, According to the CIA, the first calls for assistance came at 9:40 p.m. local time from a senior State Department official at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi to the CIA annex about a mile away. But according to multiple people on the ground that night, the Blue Mountain security manager, who was in charge of the local force hired to guard the consulate perimeter, made calls on both two-way radios and cell phones to colleagues in Benghazi, warning of problems at least an hour earlier. Those calls allegedly went to the local security contractors, who say the CIA annex was also notified much earlier than 9:40 p.m. U.S. military intelligence also told Fox News that armed militia was gathering up to 3 hours before the attack began. Now, follow-up, of course, is difficult because Blue Mountain Security right now isn't talking to anyone anymore. Point. According to the CIA timeline, at 4:04 p.m., 10:40 p.m. Benghazi time, quote, during the previous 24-minute interval, the CIA base chief calls to the 17 February Brigade, other militias, and Libyan intelligence service seeking vehicles with 50 caliber machine guns. Nobody answers the call. Breitbart.com makes a very interesting aside in regards to the 17 February Brigade. This, referring to the 17 February Brigade, is a Libyan militia led by Fazi Bukatef, who has known ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I'm still quoting Breitbart. From a practical standpoint, this is not only problematic because of Bukatef's ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, but also because one of the commanders, Ismail al-Salabi, is an Islamist military leader in his own right. Point. According to the CIA report at 4:40 p.m., 10:40 p.m. Benghazi time, the attack on the consulate was still ongoing. Members of the CIA team entered the burning inferno of Villa C, I'm quoting from the CIA report, where Ambassador Christopher Stevens is believed to be hiding. CIA officials try numerous times to reach the safe room, but are driven back by the intense smoke and fire. Small arms fire continues from the Libyan attackers, unquote. Additionally, the CIA report states, at 11:30, and another 50 minutes have now passed, the CIA officers depart under fire and reach the annex 6 minutes later. However, just a few days ago, General Dempsey, while appearing on CNN's State of the Union, said the reason the Defense Department sent no aid to the Americans under attack by terrorists in Benghazi was because, quote, the attack did not last 7 hours, but was really two 20-minute attacks 6 hours apart. So who is correct, the CIA report or is it General Dempsey? During his testimony, Leon Panetta said in regards to the lack of a rapid response, quote, this was pure and simple, a problem of distance and time. There was simply not enough time, given the speed of the attacks, for armed U.S. military assets to have made a difference. And finally, Panetta emphasized, to quote the Armed Forces Press Service, that, quote, the U.S. military is not a global emergency response service. Now, the Heritage Foundation, even before Panetta made that statement, disputed the contention. Quote, Fox reports that both American and British sources say there were other capabilities in the region that were not used. There were not only armed drones that monitor Libyan chemical weapon sites in the area, but also F-18s, AC-130 aircraft, and even helicopters that could have been dispatched in a timely fashion. And while we're on the topic of rapid response, the CIA reports that at 7:15 p.m., 1:15 a.m. Benghazi time, quote, CIA reinforcements arrive on a 45-minute flight from Tripoli in a hastily chartered plane. They don't leave Benghazi airport until 4:30 a.m. The delay is caused by negotiations with Libyan authorities over permission to leave the airport, obtaining vehicles, and the need to frame a clear mission plan. So Americans are under attack, and forces sent to rescue them are negotiating with Libyan authorities to get permission to leave an airport. I'm just going to leave it at that. Lastly, when it comes to the timeline, here's another interesting observation. CIA report again, 11:15 p.m., 5:15 a.m. Benghazi time. Glenn Doherty, one of the GRS men from Tripoli, goes to the roof and joins Woods in firing positions. The defenders have focused their laser sights earlier on several Kenyan attackers as warnings not to fire. At 5:26, the attack is over. Woods and Doherty are dead, and 2 others are wounded. Who sets a laser on attackers and gives away his position to send a message not to fire at them? I'm still trying to get an answer to that question. I could be wrong, but I'll leave it out there. Someone with more expertise than me can actually talk about that. Now, it's not my intention to make a case that the Obama regime is simply incompetent or simply trying to cover up incompetence. What I am suggesting is that the attempt to make us believe they're covering up incompetence is in actuality, or at least possibly, part of a much larger cover-up. In that regard, here are a few more questions initially posed by an article in the New American. That's actually, many of them go to the heart of the matter. What was the Obama administration's full role in helping violent jihadists, self-styled al-Qaeda terrorists, and Western-backed revolutionaries in taking over Libya in the first place? Did the half-baked scheme to arm jihadist leaders who had previously fought U.S. troops in Iraq contribute to the attack, as countless experts and officials have already suggested? What was actually going on at the compound in Benghazi, which, as the ARB report states, was never a consulate despite establishment media claims? Was Ambassador Stevens recruiting and arming jihadists and terrorists to wage war on the Syrian regime? Why did the administration claim for so long that the attack was just a protest over a YouTube video gone awry, even when it knew definitely that was not the case? And was the lack of security at the compound a political ploy to conceal the extent of the lawlessness and utter chaos left in the wake of Obama's unconstitutional regime change war on Libya, as even members of Congress have alleged? It's very much possible that Benghazi Gate is only a small piece of a much larger criminal enterprise, an attempt to conceal what the New American calls, quote, the Obama administration's full role in helping violent jihadists and self-styled al-Qaeda terrorists. Perhaps. Such an explanation would explain why help never came. It might explain why it took weeks for our investigators to reach the scene of the attack. It might explain why security was systematically downgraded prior to the attack. It might explain a great many things. In the end, here's the question we should be asking. Is the present occupant of the Oval Office actively conspiring with America's enemies? Now, I'm only asking a question, but I don't believe it's an unreasonable question to ask. And I also believe it's up to Congress to get to the bottom of this matter. But that's not going to happen until Congress starts to ask the right questions. Thank you.